Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining another episode of the Ketonian Korner and our weekly discussion board. I'm Jolene Hale, and I'm here with my co-host, who is remote today, John Davidson. Hey, John.
Hey.
So today we have, our topic is on the nutrition label. So there are some things that I've known about for a while, but I had recently read a book and also listened to some podcasts that kind of brought out some not so great things about the restrictions and the governance of information on the nutrition label. And so I just kind of wanted to talk through that with you guys and bring some awareness to people that you may not have had before. Also wanted to give an update on, we had a podcast a couple of weeks ago on getting started with fitness. So my husband and I had started the program that John recommended right after that podcast. So kind of wanted to do an update on that. The fitness. So my husband and I started 4 weeks ago doing the 5x5 strong lift. And doing really well. He has decided that he's going to up his weight a little bit faster than what they're saying that he should. So some of it is starting pretty low, and then it increases by 5 pounds each time you do the exercise. And he felt like that was a little bit too light for him, so he's actually upped his a little bit quicker. And I have found that I have not been able to up mine as fast on some of them. So just kind of wanted to talk through that with you, John, and see what your thoughts are on that. So the overhead lift I have found is extremely hard. I did not really realize how weak I was in doing that exercise. So you're supposed to start out at 45 pounds, which is a empty bar. And I was not able to do that. So I actually am fairly strong with my biceps. So doing curls, I can do fairly heavy weights for a girl, I think. But the overhead press, I was nowhere near as strong. So I was actually using plates and started out at like 25 pounds. And now I'm into the 4th week, so I'm just now getting into the 45-pound range. So, how horrible is that, John?
That's not bad at all, honestly. Especially for if you're finding like there's like a little bit of a muscle imbalance, like you're stronger, you said, in your biceps. It is very common, and actually most gyms actually have a 35-pound bar also that people use. So no, I would say that's not that bad at all. And what I really like is that you didn't give up, right? You just kept pushing through. So you found an alternative, which is fantastic, and now you're gotten yourself up to where you've already built that up. So I think it's great that you're making progress like that, and do not get discouraged from staying at the same weight for a week or something like that. It's just part of the growth, because sometimes those lagging muscles have to catch up. So no big deal. Congratulations. That's awesome. You're sticking with it.
Yeah, and I found the deadlift is really hard too. So I think that you start out at, 95 pounds maybe. And I am only up to 105. I tried 110 or 115 yesterday, and I was not able to lift it off the ground at all. So I backed it back down. So I was feeling a little bit discouraged with that, because I thought that I should be able to lift it, but I still did it. Do you have any tips on how I can become stronger doing those, or just do them until I am stronger?
And unfortunately, it's do them until you are stronger. It's definitely a slow, somewhat boring, monotonous at times, but you just hang with it. The reason why you want to stay at the weight is because it's much better to do a larger. You get a little what I call overarching volume by staying with a lower weight as opposed to moving up and not being able to do hardly any. It's just better to be at a little bit lower and do more volume.
Okay. I am seeing some definition in my arms, so I am pretty excited about that. So
that's that gun show that I had.
Yeah, that's right. We're going to have a gun show in a couple weeks. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started on the topic for this week. I just kind of wanted to give a little update for everybody because I said that I would do it every 4 weeks and give an update. So with the nutrition label, the book that I read and the gentleman that I was actually listening to on podcast, it was Jeff Scott Phillips is who the author is, and the book that he wrote was Big Fat Food Fraud. And just to kind of give you a little bit of history on what he is, he was the CEO of a food company, and his company would cook or prepare and package food for healthy programs such as Weight Watchers. That was not one of their customers, but along those lines, that type of company is who they would do things for. And he was actually in the business for a while and got a reality check when some of the people that he knew personally was becoming very unhealthy by eating the food that they were putting out there. And so he made a decision to get out of the business and sell. And quite, honestly, it was a huge decision, and he took a financial hit by doing that. But after he got out of that, he decided that he was going to kind of shed some light on some of the underhanded things that companies do, as well as our program, the government programs that are supposed to regulate the food and the ingredients. So that's where most of this information is coming from, is from him and people like him. But so a couple of things that I found pretty interesting when I was going through this. Most people understand that the ingredients that are listed on your label are listed in order of quantity. So, for example, whatever the first thing that is listed on the ingredient section of your label means that the quantity of that specific item is higher than anything else. And so they have done research and found that most people only look at the top 3 or 4 ingredients. So once their marketing department found that out, they started changing the way that they used food and therefore the way that they listed food. So for instance, with sugar, the food industries started using less of the actual sugar so that the consumer would no longer see that in the top 3 or 4 ingredients. But what they did is that they started using multiple things, such as maltodextrin, dextrose, those types of things, and they would use small quantities of each of them so that none of it was listed up there, and they were able to dupe you into believing that it was something a little bit more healthy because you didn't see the sugars listed on your ingredient. So one thing that he did mention was that if they use multiple sugars and they use natural sweeteners plus your artificial sweeteners such as sucralose and those types of things, that they actually were only required to list half the amount on their label. That I found pretty disturbing, to be quite honest.
And when you say a half, this is John, it's more like because they consider like a margin of error. Is that why they're able to get away with that?
Yeah, he didn't specifically call out the reasons that they were allowed to do that, but just to kind of give you an idea, each of these food companies have somebody from either the FDA or the USDA sitting in their facility. So this specific company, and he would not give names, which, rightly so, he shouldn't have, but the person who sat in this company would actually advise them. They would bring things to them for them to approve, and he would say, oh, no, I can't accept this, but if you change it and do it this way, then it will meet the guidelines and we can approve this. So this specific is one of them that the government agency, they actually coached them on how to get through and go into these loopholes so that they could actually pass the label, and the customer they think that they are getting something healthy, but because of this loophole, they're only required to list half the amount if they're using multiple types of sweeteners, and he said it was a combination between the real and the artificial sweeteners. So I guess my takeaway from this, quite honestly, is A, do not ever believe what you read on a food label because it's not true. But eat real food and you don't have to worry about it. And that's kind of what I do, or at least try to. There's not a lot of foods that I consume that have labels, but this was very disturbing to me, that people who are trying to be healthier and be cognizant of what they're eating, we have people who are basically lying to us and making it so that we can't make the correct choices anyway. The next thing that she was saying, and this one actually made me very angry. So these food companies actually hire marketing people to create documents that appear to be scientific studies. Now, these people are not scientists. There is no research behind anything that they are putting out here. But their marketing department actually produces these documents that they send out to doctors and professors. And they also publish in magazines, and they appear to be real research. The sad part of this is that some of these doctors and professors do not follow up to see that it's a legitimate research, but they just take it at face value, and then they start repeating this stuff to their patients or their students. And so everyone knows that if you say something enough times, people believe that it's true. And unfortunately, some of the healthy things out there's no scientific research behind it at all. This one, honestly, it really made me very, very angry when I read this. And it goes, I have said numerous times that I always look to see if it is a reputable source for research, and then beyond that, who funded that research. And this goes to show that rule of thumb, you have to, because there are so many things out there that you just can't take at face value. So another example that he was given in the podcast was salmon. So this company had salmon in their frozen packaged food, and they were told that by the USDA standards, salmon alone is not considered a health food because the fat is too high. According to the USDA, frozen dinners have to have a specific ratio of fat grams to total grams of food. And if you take the fat grams of salmon, the ratio just is out of whack according to what they say it should be. So all of these companies, in order to give you your salmon, is actually required, and I guess I shouldn't say salmon, it's with any food, but they are required to add carbohydrates and sugars into these dinners so that the ratio comes down. So as I started thinking about this, I was trying to think of walking through the grocery store and, some frozen food that does not have that, And there's not a single one I can think of. All of your, healthy choice, your Weight Watcher dinners, all of those things, lean cuisines, they either have a dessert added, so you've got a little piece of brownie or, apples and cinnamon or, in that syrup, whatever it is, or you've got breads or pastas added to all these meals. And that's what he said that they were required to do, because otherwise they could not call them a health food.
Did they mention what the breakdown was, like what percentage of each macronutrients were required to fit that quote-unquote health label?
Yeah, so he was very cautious at giving too many specifics. And even in the book, I looked for that, and he mentions that there is a ratio, but he does not specify what that ratio is. Now, whether or not you could go out to the USDA site and find that, maybe. I didn't have time to go out and do that, but I will attempt to continue that research. But yeah, it's based on a ratio of fat grams, and to me that is insane. In the book, he even said, I told this USDA agent, salmon is one of the healthiest foods you could eat. Why is it that I cannot serve this? And he told them it's all about numbers. So somebody's sitting behind a spreadsheet to see if the ratio of fat grams is, balanced with the total overall grams of food. It just, I don't know. I was very irritated after reading this book at the different things that, here as the consumer, I was led to believe that this label was put out there for the intent of making things very clear, so as the consumer, I could make educated choices on what I eat. And I have found that is not at all what it is. He mentions in the book as well that sometimes he would take things to this agent, and the guy would simply tell him, just don't put it on the label, because if you do, I can't approve this. So there's possibly times that there are things in your food that isn't even represented on the label at all, so you have absolutely no idea.
Yeah, so it's not in the list of items to talk about, but just to kind of go a little bit above that, is items that are considered a processing agent, and I'm using air quotes like that, do not have to be added to the label depending on the amount. So that's another way that they can, quote unquote, sneak those things into the food, especially when it comes to if you have a gluten sensitivity or gluten intolerance. That's a way that sometimes you can get caught because the ingredients don't necessarily have it listed, but the item is not listed as gluten-free because they had some type of starch that was used in quote-unquote processing.
Yeah, and he actually did touch on the gluten-free. He, again, would not say what companies they created these foods for, only that it was similar to Nutrisystem. But he did state that when consumers would order their food and they would ask for gluten-free, what they decided was that they were going to put products in there that were not gluten-free, but then they would ask the customer, why do you need this? And they would keep pushing the issue, and if the customer finally said, well, I don't really have celiac, they would sell that to them thinking that it's gluten-free, when all actuality it wasn't. But if the person persisted and said that it was a health issue, that they would be deathly ill if they ate this, they would talk them out of purchasing their products. So, this whole entire book was just so disturbing to me. Not that I don't think that people and companies are above finding loopholes, but it just is disturbing that the government has agencies in place that actually help them find these loopholes, I guess. It was the most disturbing thing to me. But One of the things that he said, and it kind of puts this whole thing in perspective for me, was that at the time of the book writing, and I apologize, I did not look this up to see if he is still in this position, but at the time the book was written, the head of the FDA was Michael Taylor, who used to be the VP for Monsanto. He has actually been appointed that position, I believe, 6 different times, and when he leaves the FDA, he goes back to Monsanto. This Michael Taylor, along with others, are making all of the rules for the FDA and the USDA to abide by. That to me is, it's insane. I cannot even imagine that, how that could not be considered a conflict of interest. He also talked about natural flavors, which I think John and you and I have talked about this before. Like, what does that actually mean? He says that there is no regulation behind it. They can list anything and call it a natural flavor, but there is nothing that regulates that at all. So looking at that, I mean, there's no way to even know whether it actually is natural. He says that marketing terms are natural, organic, free range, gluten-free, low carb, net carbs, low fat, because society has driven this behavior. They jump on these fad bandwagons, and their marketing companies, they just start putting these words on labels so that they dupe you into thinking that this is the same thing as what you think that term means. But again, all they have to do is not make the claim that it is going to correct your health or do, something. If they make it generic enough, they can use those terms, and the consumer thinks that they are getting something that's gluten-free when in all actuality it is not. One of the funniest parts of the book, and I actually laughed out loud when I was reading this, is the part about the USDA and the FDA. So the USDA regulates beef and chicken. The FDA regulates seafood. So then he started talking about eggs. So although USDA regulates the chicken, the FDA regulates eggs as long as they're not peeled. Once they are peeled eggs, now it goes back to the USDA. He talked about a lot of these companies will put things that are regulated by both departments in their food, because once they do that, neither department will take ownership of it, so there is no regulation. If you buy these frozen dinners that have beef and seafood, there is no department looking at what they're doing, and no one is signing off on these labels, according to this Jeff, because nobody takes ownership. It's crossing 2 different departments, and neither one of them will take ownership. So he also started talking about the ingredients that they use. So for the gluten-free, for instance, so when they actually are making a product, which he mentioned in the beginning that they did do a true gluten-free when they started in business with some of these partners, they actually changed the way they did things so that their bottom dollar was better. But when they did start doing the gluten-free, he said that the ingredients that they used to replace the gluten was more unhealthy for the general population than the gluten ever was. So although they were making this to cater for people with celiac, and that, that is a real thing, and those people with that disease cannot eat gluten, but what they were doing is making them so unhealthy for those of us who don't have celiac and the people who do, because they were replacing it with something horrible. And again, he would not go into detail of what they used for it. I'm sure that there were some legal ramifications if he got too detailed with all of this stuff, but.
Yeah, but we shouldn't be too blindsided by that. So, I mean, even if you think of, let's say, a gluten-free pizza crust, just by like Googling the glycemic index, you can kind of understand how the fact that it may not have gluten in it is kind of doesn't really, because of the different types of highly processed carbs they're still putting in it, you can still have a extremely high glycemic load. So I think sometimes it's just like kind of doing that reality check in your mind to say, yes, I want to try to avoid gluten, but, especially where you're looking at your total carb count, some of those items end up having much more carbs than like you said, the original version.
Right. Yeah, and so
it's like trying to take a look at the total picture.
Yeah. For those of us who are keto, gluten-free doesn't equal keto anyway, so we would be looking at that. But, I mean, I know I have friends who have gone gluten-free because it makes them feel better or, whatever the reasoning is. But that one kind of hit home to me that, they think that they're taking gluten out, so they think that it is a healthier option for them. But in all actuality, it isn't. And so that was really why I picked this one to just kind of point out, because it applies for people who aren't even following the ketogenic diet. I think, you have to do research. I hate to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but the government is not looking out for you. These agencies are in place, and maybe the intent when they were first originated was, but I just do not believe that is what happens in today's world. And as sad as that is, I just don't believe that that's what happens today. He started talking about the red dye, and I vaguely remember stories, my parents talking about red dye that like M&Ms used that they thought, caused cancer or whatever, and food companies were not allowed to use it anymore. So they actually were replacing the red dye with something called anadu, I think is how you pronounce that. It's a plant derivative. And so our government allows us to use that and allows them to promote it as an all-natural. But if you look at the different countries, the UK, for instance, has banned that completely because it is more toxic than the red dye ever was. So, again, this was very concerning to me that I don't understand why it would be allowed to be used if it was more detrimental than what they were, using it to replace anyway. So some of the rest of this stuff is just kind of comments that I captured from the book and from his podcast as well. But so he says that the USDA regulates the wording more than the food. So if they put things like friendly before the buzzwords of paleo, low carb, etc., then they can use any word they want. For them to just specify that it's paleo, he had to give an explanation as to what paleo was, and so when he told them that it was considered something that they would have eaten in caveman era, the guy said, "Well, I can't approve that because you can't prove that this is what they would eat, and I don't know that that's what they would eat. But if you put the word friendly in front of it, we'll go ahead and approve it." So that's how they get around the loopholes of making statements that are, and quite honestly, that's how net carbs came in as well. If they said that it was healthy or something like that, because they're telling you that it's net carbs and you can subtract things from the overall carbs, the government says that that's fine because that's, it's a definition of what that is, and people understand that. Not that it's actually true, but because you can understand that definition, they'll allow that to be on your labels. One other thing that came pretty late in his book, the weight loss companies, such as your Weight Watchers, Lean Cuisine, those type of companies, when they are making these frozen dinners, they actually they are not required to list accurate portion sizes. So although their label says it is 1 cup, that does not mean anything. They do not have to actually use accurate measurements on those. And I don't know why it is specific to weight loss companies, because he specifically calls out that it does not apply to all frozen meals, but to these type of companies specifically, which I think is one of the biggest markets that are out there. People are always trying to lose weight and try to, think that they're eating healthier, so they go to these type of meals. And one of the other things that he mentioned in here, and I was a little bit shocked, and I don't know why after reading this, but I was a little shocked that this was allowed. But he did state in this book that they would use one sweetener, but say that it was another one. So, for instance, in some of their foods, they stated on the label that they were using stevia, but in all actuality, it was Splenda that they were putting in the food. Because it was labeled or classified as sweetener, the USDA allows them to swap them out and not change their labels accordingly. I don't know how we would know. I can taste Splenda, or if it is other artificial sweeteners, I think it leaves an aftertaste. But I'm not so certain in something that is cooked that I would be able to detect that. He did mention also that the FDA is going to be bringing out a new food label in 2018. But he did state that it was going to be even worse for consumers for them to actually understand, and there were more ways for these companies to hide things within this label. So just for your awareness that is coming out. I don't know what it looks like. I tried to look that up last night to see if I could get an idea of what the changes are going to be, and I was not successful in finding that. But that is still on my radar, so I will continue that search. And when I do find that out, I will report back to everybody. But just so everyone is aware that change is coming.
Yeah, you actually see them in stores already now. If you've there's like font changes, and I think we've been a little bit doom and gloom. So I'll tell you the positive piece of that new one is that when they break down sugar, they have to break it down to added sugar. So, for example, I was in Costco yesterday, and they had a new type of, they were like rice puff, like potato chip alternatives, and they were like giving them away as Costco does with their free samples. And I didn't eat one, but I did ask to see the bag because I was curious since it was new, and it does call out that those potato chips had an entire gram of added sugar in them. So it's kind of there are some good aspects to that piece. And I did some Googling while you were talking. Michael Taylor is still, per Wikipedia, the current chair. He did work at Monsanto multiple years, but it looks like he left in 2000 and is still in the FDA.
Yeah, he had mentioned that I think 6 different times he had been appointed to over the FDA, and then in between those appointments, he had gone back to Monsanto. I don't know. I thought the book was going to be great read, but to be honest, it was very upsetting to me. I don't usually get, react that way to things, but it really makes me angry, especially coming from somebody like me who tried for so many years to do the right thing and to be healthy with no success, to find out that some of these companies are doing this, and there's nothing saying they can't. It was disturbing to me. So, okay, so that is really all I have on this one. I do want to talk about what's coming up for next week. So we have next week's talk is fasting. We actually are going to have a guest speaker come in. My friend Tom, who has been ketogenic for quite some time. He is going to but he's going to dial in, talk to John and I about his experiences with fasting, and we're going to be able to ask him some questions on that, and hopefully answer some questions if anybody is wondering about fasting. Hopefully it'll be a good thing for you guys to listen to and get some pointers from him.